everybody, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Dana Mantilia, and my guest today is Vince Scott. Hello, Vince. How are you?
Hello, Dana. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. Before we dive into our topic, why don't we take a minute and just have you share a little bit about you and your company and all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. I am the founder of Defense Cybersecurity Group. We are a small veterans-owned business that really works with defense industrial-based companies on how they meet their compliance requirements around CMMC. It's Defense Cybersecurity Group, and you can find us at cybersecgru.com.
All right, great. And always find you on LinkedIn.
Always find me on LinkedIn. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Well, today we're going to talk about an important topic that sometimes doesn't get as much attention as it should, asset management. So our first question is going to be, what do OSCs, organizations seeking certification, need to do in regard to asset management?
Yeah, asset management is so interesting in the CMMC space. For those of us who've been watching this closely, the asset management domain that existed under CMMC 1.0 has gone away under CMMC 2.0. And you would think, well, then I have less stringent requirements on asset management. Actually, that's not the case, because with CMMC 2.0, we also got the scoping guide, the CMMC scoping guide. So anybody who has not dove into that publication as a part of their CMMC journey, I highly recommend it. I think it's a crucial piece now of how you look at CMMC. In the scoping guide, which helps companies and assessors figure out what is the edge of my environment that I need to assess, right? So I hold CUI in here. Where do I set the perimeter for that CUI? And I have it in my controlled environment, and then I pass it off to the government or others who are authorized to receive it, right? So what does that perimeter look like? That is scope. And the first requirement in the scoping guide, which is new work that does not exist are words that aren't spoken in 171, that aren't spoken in 171A, that aren't spoken in the CMMC assessment guides, is that you must have an asset inventory. We have expanded the definition of an asset. We normally think about that as hardware. Sometimes we think about that as just the laptops that people use. Sometimes we think about it as software, but the new definition of asset is actually anything of value to the company, and they include some specific examples in there. So understanding what's an asset is new work, and you got to understand that, right? So it's more than just your hardware. And then once you have your assets, you have to categorize all assets into one of the 5 CMMC categories, and that's a requirement. So as we're starting to roll out mock assessments, I'm definitely seeing that now as we've gone through the CAP and we're starting to actually do it. It has brought home to me that one of the first things you look to receive from a company is, well, we have to talk about scope. We have to talk about what we're going to have to look at and assess, how big that is. And so I want to know how many assets do you have that process, handle, or store CUI. So a CUI asset will provide security for a security protection asset, and that's going to come out of your asset inventory. So it's one of the early things that assessors are asking for in the pre-assessment phase. So if you don't have an asset database and you don't have everything categorized in there in accordance with one of the 5 categories, you're not getting assessed. Those C3PAOs are going to walk away and say you're not ready because I can't determine your scope. So it's a critical piece now in what we do, and it's really underappreciated, I think.
So I know this isn't one of our questions, but how would you say the easiest way to go about gathering that information if you're not doing it right now?
Yeah, so it depends on your scale. If I'm scaled small, I might be able to do this by walking around, right? So I'm a small manufacturing plant. I've got 50 people. I know my equipment. I go around and make sure that all those pieces of hardware are in my asset inventory. And then we say, well, what's the software that I have? And so I go and look on those and start listing software that I am installing as a part of my standard baseline that I have to have under configuration management that we'll talk about in another session sometime. And so now I've got hardware and software. And then I need to look at some of the other categories that they talk about from a scoping perspective, which could be people. Now, they specifically list people as assets and need to be in your asset inventory. I think inventorying people is an absolutely horrid leadership approach. I absolutely refuse to put people in my inventory database. We will have a people database, right? We have an HR database. We have a list, however we do that. Vince's leadership background makes it impossible for him to put that also in the asset inventory. No, we're not going to inventory people. It's a terrible message. But they do have people on the list of things that are assets, and you need to have a list. So you need to look through those things. I think there's a manual process if you're small. If you're large, then you want to start, looking at automated tools that allow you to understand what are all the things connected to your system, your network, and what are they and where are they at and how are they configured and what software they have on them. And there's a number of tools out there that help you do that.
All right, good. So that's a good way if somebody needs a starting point. Okay, so we just kind of touched on this a little bit about how people may think that asset management domain went away. So how do you want to expound on that?
Yes. Didn't it go away in CMMC 2.0, as we said? We got rid of that domain. We don't have to do that anymore. So there's the scoping guide and the asset management piece that we talked in there, but there's also in the assessment objectives themselves a number of places where it leads you to having an asset inventory. So configuration management is a great place. We talked about that as a domain. Even access control. If you look at the very first control in the very first domain, 3.1.1, right? People, processes, and things that connect to the system are, controlled. Well, when we start looking at how do I control the access of a device, right? How are devices controlled? That really leads you to having to have that inventory list because you got to know what's okay to connect so you can let it connect. And in the same fashion with people, right? I have to have my list of people that are authorized to be on there so that I know where to do that. So even the very first control under AC leads you as a derived task to have asset management. Configuration management does this as well. Identity and authorization also leads you to that. So there's a couple places where you're led in this direction secondhand out of the standard already, but the scoping guide really brings us home.
All right. And I think it's a good business practice just in general to have an asset management system in place because, these are things that you really do need to be keeping track of for a multitude of reasons. So
absolutely. Not
just CMMC. All right. How do OSCs handle assets that can be categorized as more than one asset type?
That's a great question. So in this, now you're starting to get at the more advanced aspect of this. So I recommend CMMCaudit.org. We have posted a paper on analyzing the scoping guide and where things are in scope and not in scope. And in there, we have put a flow chart on our recommendation on sort of how to prioritize what asset fits in what category to help OSCs sort of figure that out. It's not intuitive when you start off to think that there will be, hey, it could be in more than one category. I didn't realize that when I first read it, but as we got into it and actually started having to categorize assets, we realized there are places where could it be a this or could it be a that, and I don't know, and what's the priority, and how do I make that determination? And so we've developed a flow chart that's a recommendation
Are you having a hard time finding new customers? A lot of folks just like you in the IT and cybersecurity space are in the same situation. And they have embraced a new opportunity to get new clients. They're doing this by growing their online presence and maximizing the power of LinkedIn. How, you ask? I have a tried and tested method called my Cyber Social Program. I myself have been on LinkedIn and now have over 3.5 million LinkedIn views, and over on YouTube, I have over 750,000 video views. So I can show you exactly how I have done that so that you can promote your organization and become the authority in your industry. And the best part is, I've done all of this organically without one paid ad. You don't need to waste your money over on Google with pay-per-click ads. Now's the time to establish yourself. Look around. The competition isn't doing it. This is your time to shine online before they do. So if you're ready to start your online journey and future-proof your business, please, down below, click the link and schedule a time for us to have a 45-minute call where I can review the exact methodology of the Cyber Social Program. You can also click below to see some of my masterclasses, which will give you quick little snippets of a couple of things you can do right away on LinkedIn that will help with your profile. I hope to see you and hear from you soon.
It's certainly not gospel. It's not, written from the DoD. That problem hasn't really been addressed officially. But we offer a recommendation on how to handle that. And really, I haven't seen anybody seriously push back on the prioritization and the way we built that flow chart as a mechanism for figuring out how to categorize an asset. So I think it's a good example.
Okay. And then, so do you think that they should just list them multiple times? I mean, I know the flow chart probably goes.
No, you pick a category. So okay. If I have this server and this server could be, a COI asset, it could be a security risk, security protection asset, and it could be a contractor risk managed asset, 3 different categories because of the different things that it does. The flow chart walks you through a prioritization. So which one do I pick first and why?
Okay, so go check out the flow chart.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So will this really have an impact on a future CMMC audit assessment?
Yes. Absolutely, because as we talked about earlier, and I think this is the critical thing, a OSC will not be able to get an assessment unless they can show that they've got some kind of asset management process and they've got their assets appropriately categorized. If you don't have that, as the CAP readiness portion, right? So the CMMC assessment process that tells C3POs how to do assessments in the upfront part of that, which is assessment readiness, where you work with an OSC in order to determine whether or not they're actually ready to be assessed. If you don't have your stuff everything categorized, you're not ready, and it will prevent you from getting an assessment.
So that's an important thing, obviously, then to deal with that. All right. So when do you expect assessments to start?
Actually, some assessments have already started under the Joint Surveillance Program. So in September, the CMMC accrediting body worked with the Department of Defense and DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cyber Assessment Center under DCMA, to start a program where a DCMA assessor went with a C3PO assessor and provided top cover or validation that they were doing the assessment properly. And the DoD has said that if you have a joint surveillance program assessment, that will convert to a CMMC assessment when the rule drops. So there have been a few companies now, a handful, that have actually been assessed under the joint surveillance program. It's not a CMMC assessment today because the rule is not out, and the DoD has said no one can be CMMC assessed until the rule is out. So also for all the OSCs out there, any vendor who comes to you and says, I'm CMMC certified, I'm going to help you be CMMC certified, I would be concerned about that. Now, there are C3PO companies that have been assessed by DIBCAC and have been given hey, you're level 2 qualified, but technically they're still not CMMC certified because that is not in place yet. I have seen a number of CMMC certified stickers out there on people's products. I've got a GRC tool, I've got a this, I've got a that, and you pull up the pamphlet on it and it's got CMMC certified. They're not CMMC certified. No. And so I have a real problem with that. I've actually reached out to a couple of companies that fall in that bin. I don't think it's appropriate. And my recommendation to OSCs is you need to ask a lot of hard questions if somebody's presenting themselves as CMMC certified.
And a lot of people wouldn't know that they weren't certified. So there you go. They just, somebody
has to they're
certified, they're certified.
Yeah, right. And that's the presumption. So, but assessments have already started. And then under the rule, what the DOD has said is that the rule has been submitted to the Office of Management and Budget. They've told us they can't talk publicly about the rule or the plan for the rule or how it's going or anything any more going forward. So although there have been, public conversations with Stacy Bastianic and others about the rule and how that's progressing, the rules say she cannot talk about that anymore. And what we expect is around March for that rule to be published as a part of the federal record as a draft interim rule, and then that rule to be enforced in May is the latest data that I have heard. So sometime next year, we expect the new CMMC rule to be out and real CMMC certification assessments to start after that rule is in place.
Okay, but we also want to make sure people aren't kicking the can down the street. You can still get ready. There's plenty of stuff you can do to start preparing and making your organization more secure right now. But
yeah, absolutely. I and that's a great point, Dana. Is 18 to 24 months is not too long to implement this, right? So you really don't have a program today, and you've kind of heard about this 171 stuff, and yeah, I'm sure it must be good. We're probably mostly there. We do some cybersecurity stuff. I've got antivirus and a firewall. What could go wrong? That's enough, right? No, that's not enough. And this is a very stringent standard. It requires deep evidence in order to be assessed as meeting the requirements. And so you need to have a program. You need to have people who are working on this. And you need to understand exactly where you're at across the control set from an implementation perspective. Do not assume that you must be good. So if you don't have that program, you need to get one started. If you're in the defense industrial base and you intend to stay in the defense industrial base, I feel, as many do, that this is not going to go away. The DOD is not going to not do this. This is going to come forward, and there are going to be independent third-party assessors who are coming in with a very stringent standard for cybersecurity for you to provide evidence that you are 100% meeting 320 assessment objectives and 110 controls that are required in the current regulation. So we know what those 110 controls are. We know what those 320 requirements are. You should be working on those today and constantly reassessing yourself. Another aspect of this is there are self-assessments, right? And a lot of people are familiar with that. The DOD came out 2 years ago about now and said everybody needs to have a self-assessment in the Supplier Performance Risk System, or SPRS, or SPRS. And so you had to go score yourself and you had to give your score to the DOD. Most companies have done that now. We anticipate, however, that in the new rule, that's going to be required annually instead of every 3 years. So my recommendation is sort of this fall, you probably should be conducting another basic self-assessment to understand where you're at and prepare yourself for what's coming next year with the rule dropping. Then when the rule comes out and says, oh, it's an annual requirement, you're like, we're good. We already did one. It's not a crisis, right? Instead of having it be a crisis because on May 1st, a customer asked you for one and you haven't done one and now you got to scramble.
Interesting. It's like a soap opera, the way it's all rolling out, but it's coming, something's coming. So we've got to get cracking here, but thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this, Vince, and all your great information that you have about CMMC. You are a guru in this, so I appreciate that.
Thanks for your time today too, Dana. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time. Until then,
Cheers.
bye-bye.